Abraham, in receiving God's promise, reminds God of a bit of irony. Yes, you may call me exalted Father, Lord, but I have no children. And according to custom, the steward of my house, my slave Eleazar, is going to inherit my fortune when I pass on, for I have no son to give the blessings that you have given me. And what are all these gifts and promises that you give me, O Lord, if I have no children to give them to? But God says to Abram, don't worry, my son. From you will come an heir. From your own body will come a son. And God leads Abram out underneath the desert sky in its pitch blackness and has him look upwards and says, Abram, count the stars if you can. Can you do it? Abram, those stars will be like the number of your children without the possibility of counting. I like the way Dr. Peterson in his translation of the scriptures put it when God said, you are going to have a big family, Abram, a big family. And he did. For you see, my brothers and sisters, you and I are among the spiritual descendants of Abraham. We are his spiritual children. And so we have the right to count ourselves as among the stars in the promise of God. And as God led Abram out and told him that that starlit night would represent the nation which he would find and the many nations that would come from him, from his body, the scripture says that Abram believed. Abram believed God. And God said, Abram, I declare you set right with God. And Abraham asked God a question, Lord, how am I to know this? And thus comes the strange ritual that we see happening in this biblical account. God says to Abram, get a young cow, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. And they should be 3 years old. 3 years. Now that's an unusual number because in the Levitical text later on when Moses gives the requirements for sacrifice, the animals to be brought are not 3 years old, but 1 year old. We don't necessarily understand why in this account God has asked for 3-year-olds, but they are there. And the large animals are divided, and the small animals are placed on one side of the other. And between these animals, there is a pathway. I think that the best way we can look at that is we're looking at Mesopotamian contract law 3,800 years ago. And in the making of a contract, people would shed blood because of its sacredness, and they would take and spread animals about, and they would walk between them to seal their deal, as if to say, may I be divided like these animals are divided, should I break my contract, my covenant with you. But in this case, Abram does not walk between the animals, for he's not instructed to. He merely, during the day, keeps the vultures and birds of prey away from them. And at sundown, a deep and foreboding, and in Scripture, a fearsome trance, it says, came over Abram, and he fell into a deep sleep. And in that sleep, he saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch move between the animals. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. Let me give you another example or illustration of what that is. A smoking fire pot can be another term for a pillar of cloud. and a flaming torch, a pillar of fire. And several hundred years later, when God would lead his people from Egypt back into the promised land, when God would deliver those children of Israel out of slavery, it was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of cloud of fire by night that would guide them. And so the Holy One of the universe makes a covenant with a simple man. And why? Because Abram was a man of faith. The writer to the letter to the Hebrews put it this way: by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set forth for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out, not knowing where he was going. And so from this Old Testament lesson, there are several things that we can learn during this Lenten season which can be helpful for us. And the first lesson is that Abram believed God when nothing much seemed to be happening. God said, "Go," and Abram went. In his time, Abram wasn't all that great. He was a very common man. It is the God of history who has transformed Abram into Abraham, the patriarch, the father of nations. We all dream of doing great things for God. I have a little game I play with myself that I enjoy weekly, when I will take $1 and go out to the local Safeway and buy a lottery ticket to try to win one of the big jackpots. I think to myself as I put the ticket in my pocket that I'm rich. I am potentially a very rich man, maybe even over $100 million. How great is that? And if I win, I'll be able to do great things for God. But that's generally not how it happens. We don't get large sums of money to be like Bill and Melinda Gates and to create great foundations. But what we do have, what God lets us cash out with, are small 5s and 10s, small gifts, inglorious gifts by themselves, but when used for God, they become glorious gifts. Abram was faithful in little things, and God made him great for this, because Abram believed God. The second lesson we can learn is that the Holy One makes great people out of ordinary people who believe. As I said, Abram was very ordinary. He was not politically correct. He lied to the Egyptian officials about his wife Sarah, claiming her to be his sister for fear that they would kill him. He was no great conquering hero. He fought no big battles. Abraham was not a great orator. He did not come down from the mountain. He didn't have the charisma of other leaders of God. He didn't set the world on fire. Abraham was an ordinary man, but he had the concept of extraordinary belief in God. And God takes people with extraordinary belief, ordinary people, and transforms them into people who change history. I think the third thing we need to learn from this Sunday's lesson is that God gives rewards on God's timetable, not our timetable. This is very much a personal lesson for me now. I'm in a season of discontent in my life.